Hi everyone, and I'm so excited to bring Friday Book Bites back in 2021. It's going to be a little bit different this year. I'm going to be doing it fortnightly instead of weekly, but I'll be dropping in every second Friday to your lunchtime. And I've got a great lineup of authors, starting today with a very exciting new author on the block, Tori Haschka. Hi Tori, how are you?
I am terrific. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for joining me. It's so great to be back live again, even though we had a few technical difficulties at the beginning, but that's part of the fun, isn't it?
Yeah. I want to know where my tech support is. I let my husband go out for the day.
Oh, well, mine's here, but he's on a phone call. So
Yes.
always the way. When you need them, they're never around, are they?
Yeah.
All right, we've got Tracy joining us. Hi, Tracy. Tracy's one of our regular listeners. Great to see you, Tracy. And Nola is back again. Hello, Nola, all the way from Western Australia. We have Carrie here as well, and Annie. So we're going to get stuck into this, but before we do, Tori, and I always do this right up at the front because otherwise I forget, because we get talking about books and then I get distracted. So I'm going to put the details of our giveaway up right from the beginning. I met Tori last week at her launch, an actual live author event, which was so nice to go to. And I got Tori to sign a copy of her wonderful new book, Grace Under Pressure. So for anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question, whether that's here today during the live stream or if you're watching this back later, anyone who leaves a comment up until midday on Saturday, Sydney time, you will go in the draw to win a copy of Grace Under Pressure. So, Tori, what we're going to talk about today is something that's close to my heart and even closer to your heart, and that is that delicious marriage of food and fiction.
Yes.
It's a lovely combination, and it's common. In my Kookaburra Creek Cafe, there was a marriage of food and fiction. You've got people like Josephine Moon who do it all the time, and if I reached back into these shelves, I could probably pull off 5 or 6 other books by different authors that do that. I want to start asking you first up, why do you think food and fiction is such a good marriage?
I think it works well because food tells stories on its own. So as a writer, you're always looking for ways that you can make a story richer. And there are so many metaphors that just readily exist within the realm of food, whether something, like even the concept of drinking a cup of tea cold. If you know somebody is drinking a cup of tea cold, it's because of the other pressures on their life. It's because they never got a chance to, it speaks of disappointment. It speaks of, it's a metaphor for sadness. So I think that a lot of writers, you and I, being 2 of them as well, lean on food because it helps enrich a story in the same way that you can enrich a dough. I think the other thing
it's
that
really interesting
works
that was the
me,
example that.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, go on. I think we had a bit of a delay there.
No,
sorry.
I was just going to say that I think sorry, a little delay there. I think the thing that works for me also is that food is such a rich carrier of family heritage as well. We all have such a connection to the food that we ate when we were growing up. It tells us of who our forebears were, and food is also such a great carrier of social status. We have aspirational food. In Grace Under Pressure, one of the things that I really try and delve into is, the cult of wellness, #blessed and green smoothies and all of that kind of, semi-madness. And the ability of, of just because, are we really what we eat? Is what we eat, how much does that tell us about a person and their motivations and who they want to be?
Yeah, and I really like the example that you just used then of the cold cup of tea, because there's a moment in the book where one of the husbands, and I can't remember now which one it was, is drinking his hot coffee, and the wife makes that comment of, he always gets to drink his coffee hot. And I nearly burst out laughing at that because that is so my household. I try to get my husband to do something and he's like, oh, I've just got to finish my coffee first. And I'm like, I haven't had breakfast for 3 weeks.
When was the last time any mother drank a cup of tea hot, really, unless it was like Mother's Day and it was like as given as a special sanctimonious, like this is your present for you. Yeah, I think that's that's very true for you. I mean, what was the motivation for the cafe in Kookaburra Creek? What was that made you want to make food such a central part of your work? Hello.
For most cafe and I find it quite therapeutic. I'm just going to keep visual there for her to have that same kind of cakes, for example, and uses that as a way for her to work through some of her issues and have her therapy. So for me, I find it quite therapeutic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And did you find that, developing recipes to go along with it was a way to sort of bring the story to life?
I did, and I've actually was going to ask you about the recipes later, but we'll jump in straight now because we both have recipes in the back of our book. So in Kookaburra Creek, we've got the cupcake recipes from the cafe, and in Grace Under Pressure, we've got some of those wellness recipes in here. One of the ones I would like to try is the Easy Date Almond and Cacao Torte. But yeah, I tried out every recipe that was in that book, every cupcake flavour combination that Alice used. I tried out, and I would take them to my daughter's teachers at school to eat because, it would have been a bit indulgent to eat them all here at home. Did you experiment with those recipes as well that are in the back of your book?
Absolutely. Well, those recipes actually had a first life for me because before I wrote fiction, cookbooks was what I used to do. And I developed recipes for a grocery chain in New South Wales. It's called Harris Farm Markets, and I published two cookbooks. And one of the other projects that I worked on when I was pregnant with both of my children was a series of recipes that I documented on a blog, which traces a pregnancy from the size of a poppy seed through to a pumpkin. You know how all those apps give you, this week your baby's the size of, a date, and this week it's a plum, and then it's a Swiss chard, or it goes on and on. So one of the projects that I had when I kept a food blog was I tracked both of my pregnancies with it. And so I developed sort of 36 recipes for both of the pregnancies that, found its way through it. And that date cake was one of the ones from my second pregnancy. And it's sort of a default, chocolate cake that I now make for kids' birthday parties. Because it doesn't have that much sugar in it because it's dates. I mean, it's still sugar, but it's a different kind of sugar. It can be made allergy-free, so I do it with oat flour instead of the ground almonds, which is also in the book. And I've got a child who's got a dairy allergy, so I do it with coconut oil instead. So a lot of those recipes that are in the book and are also Grace references as the book goes on are things that actually had a role in my life. So luckily there wasn't too much extra testing that I had to do because it sort of existed beforehand, but they in earlier iterations of the book there was a recipe for every chapter of it, and that was one of the things that I found really hard because coming from a place as a food writer first, the recipe has the prime position, and it was a really big transition for me into the realm of novelist to realize that it has to be the characters and it has to be the story that carries it first, and then the food has to sit in more of a secondary role for it. So, that was a bit of a transition, but it was, it's been fun.
I'm just going to jump in here. We have the video frozen on Tori. It's not the most flattering position to be in, Tori, but it's also not the worst, so don't panic. But the sound is coming through fine. So I'm just going to soldier through and hope that the video catches up eventually. The recipes in your book and my book differ quite a lot, and this is going to lead into one of the viewer questions that we've got here, which I'll pop up in just a moment. Now, you mentioned this culture of wellness that seems to be doing the rounds at the moment with kale and quinoa and all of those wonderful things. And I think Grace, your main character, would probably have a heart attack if she read the recipes in the back of Kookaburra Creek Cafe, which are full of sugar and butter and all the things that we're not supposed to be eating. And that leads me to Tracy's question here. which I'll just pop up on screen, which is, are you, Tori, a sweet or savoury person?
I'm actually more of a savoury person, probably. And I'm a savoury person probably because I like wine quite a lot. And so the idea of being able to sit down and have a long meal, you know, with a glass of wine over friends, makes me lean towards savoury. I'm also a huge cheese lover, and so anything that can be had, like, I think if I had to choose, you know, choose a vice in life, cheese would probably be it. And yeah, so that would be where it was. I always joke that that I, whenever my daughter, who's 4, will turn around every now and again and have a tantrum and say, you know, you don't love me. I'm like, darling, I gave up cheese for 14 months for you. She's got a dairy allergy, so I had to, you know, give it up while I was feeding her. I was like, if you really want to know the measure of my love for somebody, it's, you know, what are you willing to give up? And that I gave up cheese for her.
Hopefully one day she will learn to appreciate that sacrifice.
Yes, exactly.
We've got a comment here from Annie that said this episode should have come with a warning that it would make her hungry. She's going to go and heat up some lunch now. And Carrie's the same. She wants a glass of wine as well as some food. So we're doing our job, Tori. We're doing our job really well.
Excellent. In terms of food and fiction, I mean, what are some of your favourites, Sandy?
Books that cover food and fiction?
Yeah.
Oh, look, I don't think you can go past a Josephine Moon. And I started with her from the very beginning when she wrote The Tea Chest, and that was all about tea. And then her second book was called The Chocolate Promise, and I am a huge chocolate lover. I'm the opposite of you. If I had to give up chocolate, I would be in deep trouble. And I just, anything with food in it, anything that mentions a restaurant or a cafe. There's one that I can't remember the name of, that something and linguine. I love the transportive component that food can also bring to a novel. You know, when I'm reading your descriptions of what these ladies are, you know, getting ready for breakfast and things like that, and I can just transport myself into those kitchens.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the greatest entry points, I mean, I love food memoir is a real sort of, it's a specialty niche, but it's one that I really love. And there's a woman who was the restaurant critic for the New York Times for years in the early 90s, called Ruth Reichel, has written a series of memoirs, one of which is called Garlic and Sapphires, which covers her time as the food critic at the New York Times, which was probably the first thing that really got me into it. And just the way that the meals that she ate conveyed the relationships that she was having at the time, and how the food that you also prepare for people can stand as, you know, as a totem of affection. And I think that's one of the things that I talk about in Grace, that, you know, when Grace goes to great efforts to build, you know, the children's birthday cakes, you know, that they're these, you know, they're not just cakes, they are totems of affection for her. And there's a similar thing that happens in one of Ruth Reichel's earlier memoirs, where she realizes that she was in love with her second husband, and that she'd fallen in love with this man by, you know, the sheer scale of the birthday cake that she makes for him, and that it's, you know, it wasn't a cake, it was a public declaration of love for it. And I think that's what I like, the way that food can so often say things that, you know, that we're not quite ready to yet.
Absolutely. I remember when I was first dating my now husband, and we're going back 27 years ago now. I think it was the first year that we were together. For his birthday, I made him a Star Trek Enterprise birthday cake, like the full thing. And I mean, if that's not showing love, I don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to go through a couple of the comments here, and then I've got another question for you. Leanne has joined us, and she said that cafes are often an important setting for turns of events. And it's true. We celebrate at cafes and restaurants. We commiserate at cafes and restaurants. We catch up with our girlfriends. They're such central parts of our lives now, aren't they?
Absolutely. They're also great places to work for me as well. I get a lot of good work done. But I also think there is something about the public performance of eating that does make it that heightens the drama in it. So that's something that, you know, I certainly used as turning points in Grace was, you know, the children's birthday parties where everybody's, you know, there and standing around ready to cut a cake, or another party where people have come together to make pizzas together, and there's that sense that people are not only clubbing in as a communal activity, but then also watching each other eat, and what does it mean, you know, if somebody's eating or not eating, or how much they are. But I also think that, you know, when I think about the roles of cafes and restaurants, when I think about Leanne Moriarty's 3 Wishes, and the fact, you know, that the seminal scenes in that happen, you know, in restaurants, of, you know, the drama and, you know, people watching on as these, you know, relationships between the women implode in public with, you know, a birthday cake knife. Yeah, so much of our life is lived in public around food that the drama is always so delicious there.
It is. And we've got a comment here from Nola, which is a congratulations to you, Tori, for your showing of commitment with giving up the cheese for for your daughter. And Nola has also said that we often show our love through our food, which is absolutely true. And Annie's taken that one step further and says that she often wears her toddler's food as a sign of her affection for him. I think every mother has been there.
I mean,
more
this
than
is
once.
the third outfit of the day for me. Ended up with, like, you know, peanut butter hands down the shirt this morning, half a smoothie on the other one. Yeah. Well,
mine's 15 now, so I don't have this problem anymore with her being 15, but I do remember those days very well. Now, you mentioned some of your nonfiction work, and I've got just a couple of them up here, and I wanted to ask you, did you always see yourself moving from the nonfiction world into the fiction world through your food?
Not necessarily. No, I mean, both of my, so Travels with My Spatula certainly has travel stories. So there was much more of a, you know, a storytelling element to it. And then Cut the Carbs, you know, has extended header notes to it, but it is much more of a strict recipe book. But I think, you know, we all go through different phases in our careers. And I just got to a point where there was more that I wanted to say than you could put in the 200 words at the start of a recipe. And so this feels like a real treat to be able to combine the two of them. I mean, I'm not saying that I wouldn't like to go back and do more recipe books again, but I'm having a lot of fun doing fiction, and I'm working on the world expansion to Grace at the moment, and trying to figure out in the same way there what role food is going to play in a second book, because I think it is something that, you know, a lot of us love food and we love novels, and particularly stories about women and the complexities of women's lives. And so finding a way that I can marry the two of them together is really the best of both worlds for me at the moment. One of the other challenges that I had was, I don't know, I got to a certain stage of parenthood where some of the joy of food preparation had been stripped out of it for me. And I think, you know, It's very easy to love food and to love cooking, but when you get into the grind of 3 meals a day for, you know, difficult critics at home, and I've got one child with allergies and another one who's a selective eater, and then a husband who, you know, loves to eat everything under the sun, and I do too, but you end up cooking 3 meals each night in order to appease everybody. And it just got to a stage where I was like, this isn't as much fun as it used to be. What's fun? Storytelling is fun. So that's where I've sort of gone to. But in the next book, what I'm really looking forward to doing is exploring much more of the idea of inherited family recipes and comfort food. Like, what are the foods that we turn to when we need consolation in our lives? Mm-hmm. And I don't think I really got that much of a chance to explore that, you know, that rich area in Grace because of the, you know, anxieties about wellness and stuff. That was more the topic area for it. So, yeah, comfort food is king, particularly after 2020. Like, we all need a bit more comfort food right now.
Yeah, and comfort food is a very different area, I think, for most people than that wellness type of food. I'm not sure kale is particularly comforting for most people. Just a comment here from Annie. She says that wearing white is a sign of courage in her house. Oh, I like that. I like that.
Yes.
And this is an interesting one from Carrie, and it ties into what you were just saying about making 3 meals a night, that 2 of her grown-up daughters are vegan. And it's
Yeah,
interesting the way that parenthood affects our relationship with food.
absolutely. I mean, completely for me. I had to, when I had a child with allergies, it had to I had to relearn how to cook. I had to relearn how to make the stuff that was comforting to me in a way that was palatable for her. And I had to, it's a hard thing to conceptualize that the food that makes you feel the best is going to make somebody that you love feel very sick. So and for veganism, that's a challenging bundle. That's a challenging bundle to have to cater for.
It is. And for me, I've never counted a carb in my entire life, which if you look at me, you can tell. But my daughter was diagnosed when she was 7 with type 1 diabetes.
Oh,
and
wow.
so I had to have a very quick learning curve on counting carbs and doing all of that. So, yeah, absolutely being a parent changes the way we look at food for any number of different reasons, I think.
Yeah. And I think the people who have had food specific challenges in their parenting journey, it does change the taste of it a lot. It adds a level of anxiety that that a lot of people aren't necessarily accustomed to, and it does make it's like you're on a parenting video game and somebody just turned up the difficulty notch on it. It's like, okay, now try this. Try this.
Yeah, I'm constantly living in fear because 1 in 3 diabetics become celiac, and my daughter loves her pasta and stuff, and I'm just like, oh man, if we have to go down that road, I don't know how I'm going to cope. I mean, I will, because as mums we do cope, but
well,
such a big part of our lives.
You'll call me,
yes,
and we'll come up with some options together.
Or,
so I've got a dairy allergic, and then she's also intolerant to wheat, my daughter as well. So yeah, we have to there are often 2 or 3 meals that are prepared every night in this house.
Well, just add a 4th one, come over to my house and cook those meals as well.
Yeah, great. Well, this is the whole premise of Grace Under Pressure, is that sometimes
it actually is, isn't it?
Too hard, and that we would be much better if we just all lived in a village and we could just share some of these burdens and responsibilities with each other. So I could do the cooking and you could work on the home readers with my kids, and we both, have a glass of wine and fold the washing together.
Done. Oh dear. Oh, poor Nola is talking about her experience with her child. Her daughter got soup overload when she became vegetarian, as Nola ran out of ideas. We shouldn't be laughing, Nola. I'm sorry, but
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, we can come up with some good ones for you, Nola. But yeah, I think that's it. That that we all have things that we refer to as our own food DNA. And then when they are no longer easily within reach, it does put us in an area of discomfort. And sometimes, if we're talking about writing, being in an area of discomfort is where the drama comes from, and that's where the character growth comes from. So, if I was going to get philosophical about it, I've tried to retrain some of it and filter for the positive, but it doesn't mean that on a daily basis, it's not really hard.
It's that pushing beyond that comfort zone is where the magic comes in writing as well, I think.
Yeah.
So,
we've got. I want to know about your writing routine, Sandy. Like, do you find yourself getting up for distraction snacks and things while you're writing, or are you very strict with it?
I don't need to get up for distraction snacks because I have them on my desk with me.
Great.
Maltesers, M&Ms, anything like that. So I preempt what I'm going to need, and I have them here waiting for me.
So there's no excuse to leave the computer. Okay, great.
That's right. And then I can pretend I've worked the entire time when really I've just been eating. So we've got another comment here from Annie. We've got a lot of people coming through with their own experiences. Her son had a dairy allergy for a long time and still somewhat struggling with it, but we had to make many adjustments. She can't imagine counting all your kids' carbs, Annie. Well, thankfully she's old enough now that she counts her own carbs. But yeah, they do come with challenges. Tracy's also mentioned that her sister's son has celiacs and she's had to learn to cope. And back when he was diagnosed, it was a very expensive exercise and not a lot of variety. That is one of the good things about this wellness movement, I suppose, apart from the fact that I tend to mock it a bit. It has given a lot more freedom to people with allergies and conditions like celiac, because it is becoming much more common now to find those sorts of foods and recipes.
Yeah, but there is also, that's, I think, one of the reasons why it is easily clubbed in with this notion of privilege, because, you know, there is a tax, you know, it's not an official tax, but, you know, everything is more expensive once you start moving into an allergy stream. And yes, you can, you know, you can just eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, and lentils and pulses and things are all very cheap. But, you know, coconut yogurt, that's $10 a tub as opposed to $3 a tub for it. You know, rice milk is more expensive than etc. So I had the second book that I'm working on at the moment is about au pairs, and the premise of, you know, how much easier would our life be if there were just two of you in the house. You know, if there was a second younger version of you who could help do half the work, you know, would your life be easier? And you know, the story tells that, you know, sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's a lot more complicated. But I had one myself for a year when my husband was traveling constantly, and I had two very unwell children at home.
Right.
And I needed to have somebody else in the house if I had to take my asthmatic son to hospital in the middle of the night, so I didn't have to wake the baby up. But it was a really challenging conversation to have with her, because she was, you know, young and American and had completely drunken the Kool-Aid of this cult of wellness and wanted to be, you know, as healthy and Spartan and dairy-free and gluten-free and, you know, everything as possible. But trying to explain to her that, you know, I pay for your food and you are in my house and you are part of the family, but please, like, don't eat the $11 yogurt. Like, all of the $11 yogurt goes to the child with the allergy who can't eat the other yogurt. You don't have an allergy. You just want that yogurt. So can you please just eat the Greek yogurt? And then if you want the other stuff, maybe we'll find a way and you can pay for some of it. It gets to, you know, there's an expense that comes and a level of, you know, additional burden in those sort of dietary necessities that I think is really challenging for some people as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we've got an offer from Carrie here. Carrie's going to come and live in the village with us both. That's really lovely, Carrie. But we'd like to know what you're going to bring to the village. What skill are you going to bring to us?
Bring this, what skill base?
We can't just let anybody into the village now, can we? Now, one of the things that you do in your book, which I found quite charming, and it's not that common in commercial fiction, is that you've given some beautiful chapter headings. Now, I don't know if we'll be able to see this. There we go. Abandoned bacon and egg rolls. As mothers, I think we all know what it means to abandon the food. But there are things like the kale smoothie, which is definitely not anything I can relate to. Fairy bread, which I most definitely can relate to. Busted apple pie, we've all been there. And these headings tend to reflect what's happening within the chapters of these ladies' lives. How important was it for you to have those chapter headings in, and did you have to fight for it with your publisher?
No, actually, that was something that that was sort of, I mean, as you know, there's a delightful process that happens when you hand over a manuscript, and it stops becoming just yours and it becomes a collaborative project. And so the chapter headings originally were the recipes. So there were recipes at the beginning of each chapter. And it was a decision that we made that took you out of the narrative flow for it. And it was better to put them in the back of the recipe. But then it was sort of a joint idea that we had that, you know, that the food that we eat or the food that we think about is what can help, you know, tell a story of our lives. You know, we know if a day's a good one, if a cup of tea is drunk hot. We know if a night is sad, if the apple pie ends up busted on the floor. We can tell, you know, how challenging early days of motherhood are by, by what your body feels like at the time. If everything just feels wobbly and wet, you know, which is like the center of an omelette that I talk about in the book. So I think that was something that once we decided that was going to be it, became, like a really fun project. And I think, you know, that's going to be something that I'll carry over into the next book and probably the one after it, because I just love the way that, you know, even if I'm flicking back through my own sort of diaries, sort of I make a list at the beginning of each day of, you know, as I'm sure every single mother does, while you're having a cup of tea or a coffee, of, you know, what do I have to do today? And on my list of each day, I always like write down the bottom, what's for dinner? So I know, you know, what I have to pick up at the shops or what I have to prep at what point in time. And there's something about going back and just flicking through my diaries, and I can tell the mood of the house. I can tell, you know, I can tell where we are in terms of, you know, the complexities of, you know, how much bandwidth I have, how excited I am about life by what I've decided to cook for dinner. I mean, last year there were a lot of lasagnas cooked in lockdown. We called them lockdown lasagna. I mean, I don't think I probably need to eat lasagna twice a week, but it became, you know, if I look back at those diaries and I'm like, oh, you're eating a lot of lasagna, you know, and that told of the kind of comfort that I needed. And also that I needed an activity that I could do with a 3-year-old under my feet that would keep her entertained, you know, because she helped me, you know, make the bechamel and she helped me roll the pasta and things together. So, yeah, I think if you looked at the meals that you cooked in the last week, Sandy, I'm sure that the dinners would tell the story of what the day was.
Absolutely. You know, I'm on fine form when I'm making my own pesto and crusting my own lamb racks, as opposed to when I get the Coles ready meal pasta and bung it in the microwave.
Mix it all together. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually often directly related to how tired I am.
Yes. Yes.
Oh dear. Now, I'm not sure who is suggesting this, but we might have to bring them into the village. Oh, it's Carrie. Can her son come and live with you for a little while, Tori? Nothing permanent, maybe a week.
Absolutely. I mean, is he 7 or 8 and does he know anything about Minecraft? If so, yes, absolutely. My son is always better with a friend. But I do think that one of the things that helped inspire Grace Under Pressure for me was partly, you know, this was a sentiment that I heard whispered by women all the time of like, why don't we live in a village of women? You know, this is the way that our nonnas did it. This is the way that the women in generations before us did it. It was not a solitary exercise of us in our houses toiling and balancing things on our own. We did used to live in collaborative ways where, you know, the load could be shared. And one of the things that helped inspire me was that, you know, when my kids were really little, I had sort of 4 girlfriends who lived locally, and 2 nights out of the week, sometimes 3 nights out of the week, we would just club together in sort of, you know, we didn't all live together, but we lived close enough. And we would come and we would share the load of cooking dinner for both the kids and the adults. We would feed the kids. Somebody would hold the crying baby. Somebody would, you know, feed the toddlers sausages and, you know, battens of cucumber that would end up on the floor. We put them all in the bath together, one after another. And then at 7:30, we'd take our kids home in their pajamas, fed. We'd have had a glass of wine. Sometimes we'd eat dinner together. Sometimes we'd take home a Tupperware to, you know, heat up later on. Yeah. And it was just that thing that made those end of the days, you know, that sort of those witching hours, you know, the arsenic hours that you talk about between sort of 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock, which can be so lonely and so hard, you know, just that much more palatable because you got that sense that you weren't alone in it. And I think that that is something that we, you know, that we have lost. And people really have to fight to reclaim it.
No, I absolutely agree. And one of the things that I could really relate to, particularly with Grace, was her travelling husband. Mine doesn't travel at the moment. Obviously, with COVID, there was no travelling at all. But when Emily was much younger, he was away a lot. And I could relate to that sense of complete and utter loneliness, I guess, and having to do it all yourself.
Yeah, and I think I mean, a lot of us have spouses that travel, and even if they don't travel, you know, the demands of a working day these days have stretched so far beyond what they were when we were growing up. You know, the idea that you could go to work from, you know, 9 to 5 and you'd come home and you'd be uncontactable is just such a creative fiction for so many of us now. So, you know, the amount of kids who can say, you know, mummy or daddy's on a call and they understand what that means. But I think, there's a loneliness that comes from being part of a family unit where somebody else is constantly being pulled in another direction. And, particularly when children are small. I mean, it's certainly easier for me now because I can have a conversation with my son. He's hilarious. And I'm sure, Emily's a great comfort to you as well. But it's not the same as being in the company of adults.
No. And it was, I think when Emily was in year 5, so we're going back quite a few years now, and my husband came to one of the barbecues. I can't remember what it was for, maybe an election day barbecue or something at the school. And one of the other mums turned to me and went, "Oh, he actually does exist." They thought I'd made him up. So I was thinking, if I'm going to make him up, he's going to look like Hugh Jackman, right? I mean, come on. I've gone off a little bit track there. Now, it was Annie that wanted to pass off her son.
Okay.
He's 2 years old, and Carrie's son is 19 years old. I'm not sure if 2 and 19 will work for you, Tori.
I mean, listen, the 19-year-old I can script. There's definitely work that I can get him to do, and I think the load of a 2-year-old needs to be shared. Like, I think that is 2-year-old boys is high octane parenting. That is really, There's a bit that I talk about in Grace at the very beginning where she's trying to do a grocery shop with a toddler in tow. And I think that there really should be, just medals of valor that are given to women on a daily basis for being able to get through, a grocery shop without a child, ejecting every third piece of, vegetable out of the trolley, the meltdowns over the colors of balloons that come out, the ability to just get a child from a car to a supermarket through and then back again without, somebody losing life, limb or their mind. I think there should be badges for that at the end of the day, because there's really not a lot that's harder.
There's not. I think you're cracking a few people up here in the background, like Annie. Yeah. And as Nola pointed out, it's the FIFO families, the defence families, those that were separated through COVID. We live such fractured lives, don't we, now, within our own family units and within the village as such.
Yeah. I mean, most of Grace was written by the time lockdown happened last year, and I was working on final edits and the sequels, but it just drummed in so much to me how hard it is to do it without a community of support, and what a toll that can take on people's both physical and mental health for it. I mean, I don't know how you managed at the end of last year, but we also got the extra bonus lockdown on the northern beaches here.
Yes, we did.
Yes. So that was a nice sweetener at the end of the year for us. And I got to the end of the year. I now have an autoimmune disease, that turned up at the end of last year. And I think, I know 5 other women who the same thing has happened to. I think there is going to be a long tail that comes from this of the damage that has happened, particularly to women's bodies, from trying to do this without the solidarity of other people around us. And there are some age children just do not flourish without contact with their peers. Even the introverts were finding it hard, but the extroverts, my 3-year-old would set up all of her teddies in the window and then just stand at the window and would lose her mind if the people walking down the street didn't, smile and wave back to us, because she was like so hungry and desperate for human contact. And there was part of me where I was like, "Oh, sweetheart, we'll just go read a book for a while." But some people, just need the face-to-face contact. And I was like, "Oh gosh, I'm an extroverted introvert, but she's just extrovert. She just needs the party." She would do much for living in the village.
And Debbie's taking a trip down memory lane, and she's wondering how she survived those early years with your working husbands and busy children. And I think her very last emoji possibly answers it. And if you can't see it, that last emoji is a wine glass.
Oh.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we all do it, but I certainly, there are days where the thing that gets me through, you know, the 4 p.m. meltdowns and the 5 p.m. meltdowns is knowing that at some stage there is a glass of wine that is waiting for me and is going to make things a little bit better. And I think one of the things that is really lovely is that it is becoming much more open, both in fiction and just in daily parlance, for women to be able to talk about these struggles and realize that nobody has it all together. There is no point pretending that we have it all together. And the idea of these, you know, and that's one of the creative fictions that I was enjoying toying with in Grace, is this idea of, you know, the Instagram mothers who perform their perfection to each other, and that, you know, that kind of facade is not doing anybody any favors. You know, everybody's having a hard time. Let's just be honest about it.
There was actually a quote in the book, and it was Grace, I think, who said it. And she said that she's a much better mum when she has an audience. And it's so true. And it's that, you know, when we live our lives on social media, we're doing everything perfectly, right? We're fantastic. When we're out in public, I would never yell at my child out in public, but oh my Lord, if you stood outside my door, you would hear things that would make a sailor blush.
Yeah, and I think for many of us is that way. And yes, I think there are two parts of that. Yes, we're better mothers with an audience, because we put ourselves on our best behavior, but also the flip side of that, we are better mothers when we are doing it, you know, hand in hand with each other. You know, some of it is too big a job to be done by one person. You know, anybody who's ever tried to breastfeed a child while convince a 3-year-old to brush their teeth or read a story at the same time, or, you know, who has 2 children with gastro going off at the same, you know, there are some things that are just, it's just too hard. And that toil is also a great source of comedy. And I think we use humor as a therapeutic tool a lot of the time, because if you didn't laugh, you would cry about it. And it's better to laugh sometimes.
It is. And I think Nola has summed it up here when she said, we all need to get real. And I think that is, we need to talk more about the realness of parenting. Yep. And it's not that we don't love it. I mean, I wouldn't give my daughter up for anything, but it isn't always sunshine and happiness.
No. And I think one of the great triggers that happened for me in wanting to write the book was exactly that sentiment. There were women who I knew in high school who I haven't seen for 20 years. And, you know, I bumped into one of them one day and our kids were down on the swings by the beach. And, you know, both of us had tough mornings with 2.5-year-olds and were, you know, nursing a coffee and enjoying the sunshine and trying to recalibrate ourselves. And she turned to me and she was like, "How are you?" And I was like, I'm good. And then I was like, "How are you?" And she said straight to me, she was like, "Do you want to have a real conversation or do you want to have a fake conversation?" And, you know, I stole that line and I put it in put it in the book. I put it in the book between 2 of the women, because I think that's it, that, you know, that we need to have more of the real conversations. And as soon as we start admitting what is difficult and we start, you know, sharing the, you know, our shared scars with each other, then that's when you can start to find some of the healing through it as well.
It is. Now, there's a little discussion going on in the comments here about wine.
Yes.
Annie said bugger. Now she wants a wine too. Carrie has responded with, well, it's Friday and it is after midday.
It is.
And Jem is supporting them, saying it is wine o'clock. Oh dear. Now I'm just going to pop up the details of where you can find Tori online, because we're going to wrap this up now. We've gone a little bit over time, but that's what happens when we talk about things like books and food. So this is where we can find Tori online. So if you've got any last minute questions for Tori, pop them in now. Jem's got a comment here that she loves the sounds of this woman. I'm assuming she's meaning Grace by this. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Tori, before I let you go, is Grace is the chef in this story. Yes. How much of you is in Grace?
It depends on the day. It really depends on the day. I think most novelists will say that there's some of them in every one of their characters that they write.
Yep.
And it was certainly fun putting bits of me into it, because the Grace has four narrators in it, into each of the four women. But you know, the stuff that's really true in Grace, and the stuff that I think is landing with people, does come from a place of truth. Yes,
Yep.
you know, I'm a food writer, but I don't have 3 children. You know, I only have 2. There will never be a third. So that was kind of a bit of narrative therapy for me, of like toying with the idea of just how, you know, just how mad would I go if I tried to add another spinning plate, you know, to the chaos of my life. And the other thing that's true is that, you know, I'm quite frank in the book about some of the issues with postnatal anxiety that Grace goes through, and that was certainly a road that I trod. And I don't think people talk about that enough. And what are some of the other things that are true? But I'm certainly not as mad about food as Grace is. You know, I eat cheese. I have a great love for comfort food. And so I think that, but also that the women in my life have really been the saving graces for me. And I think that's one of the things that I've also discovered, you know, as the book has come into the world, that it has just been the way that other women writers have, you know, like you, Sandy, have supported the book and have, you know, come on board and been lovely. You know, that is something that I think that we all need to celebrate more, and that the grace of female friendship for us is something that, you know, is precious beyond rubies. So that's really the bit of me from the book that is the truest.
Excellent. We've got a comment here from Nola about that interaction between Grace and one of the other mums in the book. You know, what a great question. Do you want a real conversation?
Yeah.
And I certainly resonated with that when I read that. And we've got a comment here from Annie, which I think sums up parenting, particularly motherhood, perfectly, when they were talking about, you know, it's wine o'clock and we need a wine. There is no wine in the house. She'd have to take the toddler to get some, which would make her want more wine. I mean, that sums it up, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, dear. And he also said that this sounds like a really good book. It very definitely is. I haven't quite finished it. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. So I can't wait to see what happens at the end. Carrie is definitely looking forward to reading it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tori. And Fiona McKenzie is happy that these interviews are back, because I get to talk to wonderful people like you. This is one of the happy perks of being a writer. As you said, the writing community is so supportive, particularly amongst the female writers. It's such a lovely community to be part of, and I'm very happy to do it. So thank you for joining me, Tori. And if you haven't got a copy of Grace Under Pressure, I can highly recommend it. As I said, I've got about 1/4 of a way to go now. There is a giveaway up for grabs with this as well, and it is signed by Tori. And we can't wait to see what comes out of your food fiction next.
Thank you so much. This has just been so fun. I'm sorry for the technical issues, but it's been so
It
lovely.
happens. It happens. That's one of the joys of doing it live. You know, if I had my time over, maybe I would have not done it live. But anyway, it's fun, and we get to have really cool chats.
Yes.
So we'll head off now, and thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Friday Book Bites. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.